My biggest disappointment with Warlords of Draenor is the scrapping of Farahlon. For starters, I have always loved Netherstorm, and the idea to be able to go back and see how that zone looked in the past actually spawned my interest more than the rest of Draenor combined. So the fact that it never came to be in an expansion where a selfie cam was considered a major content patch really disappointed me, especially when the explanation they gave us couldn't have been any worse even if they tried. However, the fact that I wanted to see the unbroken Netherstorm was not the only reason for my disappointment. In the past, some of my favorite content patches have been those that brought in islands, for instance Thal'Dranath and Isle of Thunder. So needless to say, when Legion came around, I kept an eye on Thal'Dranath because, honestly, after Warlords, I was certain Blizzard would repeat Faralon. I have made a few videos about Thal'Dranath, and in them I've often mentioned the similarities between the two. Today we are going to put the islands side by side to really see how far these similarities go. So without rambling any further, let's begin. The announcement of Farahlon came from Tom Shilton during the World of Warcraft What's Next panel at BlizzCon 2013. They had just finished presenting the other zones and were about to proceed to talk about the different Orc clans. This is where Tom interrupted himself, went back and said the following.
Oh, well, we've got Farahlon, that's TBD. You guys will explore that later on. So what you knew as Netherstorm at this time was Farahlon, and you'll be adventuring there in a patch, but it's not there for the launch of Warlords of Draenor. You'll have to...
There's a lot to get through.
So we didn't get much information, aside from the fact that this was indeed what would later become Netherstorm, and of course that we would venture there in a patch. And when they announced Legion at Gamescom, we could already see Thal'Dranath off the coast of the Broken Isles. Then, at the BlizzCon 2015 World and Content Overview panel, Garrett Plattner presented Thal'Dranath in a very similar way.
Alright. Okay, real quick. You notice there's one more zone we haven't talked about, Thal'Dranath. Well, we are still working on that zone, and it will be coming soon, much like we did with Tanan Jungle. All right, moving along.
So, aside from being a bit more efficient in his announcement, the context of what he had to say was the same. Thal'Dranath would not be available at launch, but it would come in a later patch. Now, when he said it would be much like Tanan Jungle, he could have meant that they intended to make the gameplay of the zone similar, or just the fact that they would bring the zone in at a later date. When the first alpha build of Warlords arrived, Farahlon could be found on the world map. However, it was far behind the other zones in terms of development. Some zones, like Frostfire and Shadowmoon, were almost finished, while Spires of Iraq and Tanan Jungle needed a bit more polish. Farahlon, on the other hand, had not even been textured. The word Farahlon was written on it, but it was not even correctly spelled. There were a few caves and Iron Horde buildings, but most notably, the alpha model of Icecrown Citadel was placed in the center. So yeah, while it was there from the start, Farahlon had a lot of catching up to do. But while Farahlon at least had some mountains and structures, Thal'Dranath was actually even further behind. It was present in the first alpha build, just like Farahlon had been, but it was really just a flat surface with the text Thal'Dranath written on it. And this is how the two islands started out. Both were announced as future patch content, and when we first saw them in-game, they really weren't more than untextured shapes. Now, as the development of Warlords of Draenor went along, we could see changes to basically all the other zones. Gorgrond even got a complete overhaul and turned into an entirely different zone afterwards. Farahlon, however, stayed completely unchanged, and when the 6th alpha build rolled around, the island vanished. Now, as you can imagine, it all went down very similar with Thal'Dranath. In the first few alpha builds, we could see how work was being put in everywhere but here. It all seemed to go down exactly like Farahlon had. However, in the 4th alpha build, there was a glimmer of hope. A few changes had arrived to the island, all very small, but finally we had proof that they had not forgot about Thal'Dranath. They had smoothed out some of the edges, cleared the outlining, and fixed the seafloor. For those hoping to one day get Thal'Dranath, this was a good day. It wouldn't stay good for long though, because already in the next patch, Thal'Dranath was removed. So in other words, while Farahlon lasted till build number 6, Thal'Dranath was removed in number 5. When they had gone, everyone of course began waiting for their return. Since we originally believed that we would get Farahlon in a patch, all eyes were focused on 6.1. And when they gave us Twitter integration and a selfie camera instead, many began to fear that they had scrapped the island. And then, in a 6.2 interview, this is what Corey Stockton said when he was asked about it.
At BlizzCon, you talked about Faralon zone that should have been introduced in Warlords of Draenor. Did you completely push it off, or do you have some hope to see it before the end of the expansion?
Faralon was a very cool idea, something we were really excited to deliver on. It turned out that Faralon didn't really fit into the story that we were telling the same way we expected the story to play out. So, as you guys probably know, things change over the course of an entire expansion. And there's a number of things that we talked about at that BlizzCon that ended up being different. I think at that BlizzCon, you could place your garrison, you could choose like whatever zone you wanted your garrison to go in. Another thing that we ended up realizing wasn't going to work with what we wanted to do. So things change. It doesn't mean Faralon isn't an awesome, cool place. The reason why we had it on the map originally is because we felt like there was a lot of cool story we could tell there, kind of a little bit of the history of Netherstorm. How did Netherstorm originally become to be? A lot of concept art and a lot of ideas on it. It just ended up not being something that played in to the expansion. Does that mean we'll never do it? Totally not. I think we're totally the kind of place that when we have a cool idea, we latch onto it and we like it. We will try to find ways to do those ideas later.
So we'll see that next expansion.
No promises on that.
Yeah.
So as it turns out, we would not get Faralon in Warlords, and the reason for it was supposedly that it didn't fit the story. And honestly, to this day, I still find this excuse dishonest and untruthful. There's just no way they would scrap an entire zone just because of this reason. Look at Gorgon for example. They redesigned that entire zone because they wanted to dial back on the Iron Horde presence. And really, whatever the problem was, whether it actually was the story or something else, I just find it so lazy that they left their player base without content for so long instead of fixing it so that we can get something more than one major content patch and one Twitter patch. And really, if you have to scrap an entire zone because your story writers can't get it to work, in an alternate universe where you are potentially able to make any exception you want just to be able to get the content to your player base, then I'm sorry Blizzard, but in that case you need to hire new people. But anyway, moving forward in time, Thal'Dranath would actually meet its end in a very similar way. Ever since it was removed, players have been wondering if it's going to come back or if Blizzard have once again changed their minds. So eventually in a live Q&A, Eon Hesychostas was asked about it, and he said the following.
Who said, "Are you still planning on releasing Thal'Dranath in a later patch?"
So we are not. This was something that was on maps in some of our earlier, displays at Gamescom or at BlizzCon, and players noticed it was on the in-world map for a while and then went away. Yes, cut content. This is not a question of reducing the content we're delivering to players. This is just, we had a better idea. We had a way cooler idea. At its heart, Thal'Dranath it's yet another ancient elven ruined island as part of the Broken Isles that had a heavy Legion presence. We've done a lot of that. We have a lot of that already in Broken Isles. We have cool new places to explore coming in our patches, and you'll have to wait and see exactly what they are, but I think when you get there, you'll agree that it's cooler than Thal'Dranath would have been.
Yeah, and so just to sort of expand on a note you had there, it's not a question of we decided just to not do anything. Yeah. It's more we decided to do something.
We had a better idea.
Yeah,
honestly. And
cool.
We have those occasionally.
Makes perfect sense to me. All right, moving on.
Now, this explanation is at least potentially a lot better. And the reason I say potentially is because, yes, he has a point. There is a lot of elven ruins with a Legion presence, and it would indeed be nice with something fresh. However though, Thal'Dranath was just a flat surface, and if the setting was the problem, they could have done what they did in Gorgon and redesigned it instead of just removing it entirely. Now, I absolutely understand that they might have gotten a better idea and wanted to go with that instead, and that is fine, that is all fine. We don't need Thal'Dranath if they can actually provide that. The problem for them now is that Blizzard have put themselves in a situation where they say, we don't have room for both ideas, so we had to choose one. And that means if Legion is maintained properly, with constant patches and without any big droughts, then Eon was probably telling the truth in this interview. And I think that the patch 7.1 reveal at Gamescom really speaks in his favor. Not only does a return to Karazhan sound amazing, but they were also quick to ensure that they are not firing all their guns at once. So for all of us that's worried that we will once again have one of these big content droughts, well, Ian ensured they got us covered. Of course, they have made promises like that in the past, but now it is more important than ever that they keep them. Regardless of what, patch 7.1 looks really damn good. Now, getting back to Thal'Dranath, they did actually find a way to keep the name even after they removed the island, so even though the original zone is gone, the name will still exist in-game. In the audiobook The Tomb of Sargeras, we find out that they have actually taken the name Thal'Dranath and given it to the island where Sargeras' tomb lies.
What happened here with the other one? The questions tasted sour, but he needed to know. All he had heard, among the screams of the unfortunate Alliance and Horde soldiers who had fallen into his care on Draenor, was that the Gul'dan from this timeline had accompanied the first Horde to war. He had been defeated and killed, eventually. Details were harder to come by. Perhaps that meant Gul'dan had met an unremarkable end, a death not worth retelling. That was not a satisfying thought.
You raised an island, Thal'Dranath, from the waters.
At your command, Gul'dan asked.
You are not here to ask questions. You are here to visit that island again. It is a long walk. Move.
Gul'dan's thoughts continued to swirl in treacherous waters. There must be something powerful here. Why else would Kil'jaeden want him to remain ignorant of it? I may have to obey him, but I do not need to trust him, Gul'dan decided. Kil'jaeden was known as the Deceiver for very good reasons, after all.
May I at least ask what is on that island? The tomb of Sargeras.
At that moment, dead silence fell over the land.
So in the end, I guess you could say that Thal'Dranath really did become an island with elven ruins and a heavy presence of the Legion. And while I am disappointed this is how it ended, as long as Blizzard can maintain Legion better than they did with Warlords of Draenor, then I am ready to believe that they actually did replace Thal'Dranath instead of scrapping it. But we will have to wait and see. After all, trust is earned, not given, and after Warlords of Draenor, Legion has a lot of repairing to do. But anyway, before we end the video, I have actually saved the worst interview for last. Because while Blizzard saving their skins by turning the Broken Shores into Thal'Dranath kinda makes sense, we can never forget how cringy it was when Tom Chilton tried to do the same thing by turning Farahlon into Ashran.
Can you talk about Farahlon and maybe what will we do in this island?
Right. Well, for launch, there's nothing there. And so we'll have to see. It's a possibility that we'll do that as patch content. There are other, we also know we want to do Tanaan Jungle, so Tanaan Jungle is definitely going to be in the patch content plan. Farahlon, it's kind of ambiguous whether or not that is the same kind of area as Ashran, whether it's an island just north of it or whether it is Ashran itself. There are a lot of different ways that we can approach that, but we'll have to wait and see.
So turning Thal'Dranath into the Broken Shores, that I'm fine with. It just makes sense in a whole other way than claiming that Fields of Farahlon would in fact be Ashran. But it is interesting to see just how similar Farahlon and Thal'Dranath have been, all the way from their initial announcement until the confirmations that they were not to be. All we can hope now is that Blizzard tells the truth and that the long content droughts are finally over. Legion looks amazing now, but there's a long time to go. And there's a lot of player trust to restore on the way. It is time to show us that Warlords was just a setback.